Croeso mawr I chi, Robin, and can I say a very warm welcome here, and I hope that you will now give your presentation and see where we go.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here to talk. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's, I think, quite brave of somebody called Rob Andrew, an ex-rugby player, to come to Wales to speak on a Saturday, but here I am, so here we go. What I'm going to do today is just explain what we've done with devolution in Cornwall so far, touch upon some of the community empowerment work we've done, then give some of the lessons we've learned and give some examples. For those of you who don't know, Cornwall went to unitary authority in 2009 when the 6 district councils and Cornwall Council combined. There's a population in Cornwall at the moment of about 530,000, so I don't really know how that compares with the sort of 22 unitaries in Cornwall, but it's the second biggest unitary for both size and population in England at the moment. Cornwall has 213 town and parish councils. I think in Wales you've got just over 700, so all of Cornwall is parished, and like you, about a third had elections last year, so there's still 2/3 that don't have elections. So there's only one at the moment that doesn't have enough members to sort of act as a town and parish council. So from that perspective, we are in quite a good position. So devolution, why bother? From our perspective, from a Cornwall Council perspective, it was a question now Paul asked me last night when I arrived. He says, do you see Cornwall Council there trying to sort of control the town and parish councils, or do you see town and parish councils as equal partners? I think when we went to unitary in 2009, we thought we could try to control town and parish councils. The reality is now in 2014, we are absolute partners, and we try to work together, all in the same space, try to solve the needs of the local population. And I think that's where things have really moved on, is we see ourselves as partners now. Though, of course, Cornwall Council has more capacity, many of the town and parish council are now really raising their efforts and raising their game to meet the challenge ahead. So we are all trying to work together. Why do we want to do that? Well, I think local control of assets, local delivery of service gives that local community much greater pride in what they're trying to do. It also allows them to meet some of the local priorities, and it also takes away some of the bureaucracy and some of the sort of middle management that gets in the way of actually getting things done in a local area. Clearly, we're in a very challenging budget climate in England, as you are in Wales, as we are in the rest of the UK. So in many areas, the only way that services are going to continue into the future is if town and parish councils and community groups have a greater role in delivering them. Also, many of the services I'm going to talk about today, it's actually more effective, more efficient, and actually so you can come up with a better local delivery model that meets local needs much easier than you can trying to control it from a unitary authority. There's also, I think, great scope to develop local small and medium enterprises, to improve the local skill base, and actually to bring volunteers forward as well. So there's some local benefit for the community there. It also brings local partnership working, and certainly something we've experienced in 4 of the last 5 years, local resilience. We've had floods in 2010, 12, 13 and 14, and huge damage around the coast in 2014. And certainly the work we've done through the local services has built the resilience of those communities, and touching a lot on what Simone was saying earlier on, that is the sort of the level we want to try and take forward some of that emergency planning stuff. And also, local communities have a much better local knowledge of those local areas, therefore they can come up with better solutions. So what have we achieved so far in the first sort of 4 or 5 years? Well, we've now had about 40 projects completed, and they vary considerably in scale, from some very small ones, some large ones. I'll talk about those in a minute. There was about 60 under development at the moment, but when we announced our budget consultation work about 2 weeks ago, looking at another 200 million cuts in Cornwall, there's probably another 20 or 30 projects that come forward in the last 2 weeks, which then puts a burden back on us with the capacity to take those forward and to manage local expectation. In many areas, I say it's the only way those services are going to continue into the future, particularly things like toilets, open spaces, playgrounds, some of those which are not statutory functions. I think the only way they are going to continue in the future is if the local community takes more ownership of them. We had a battle between the accountants and the people on the ground around the freehold leasehold debate. The accountants were afraid if there was one chance of a capital receipt being missed, they wouldn't give away the freehold. Things have moved on considerably now, so freehold is the favoured option now. If we're transferring a community asset, it's more than likely to be a freehold transfer at zero cost, or a token cost as opposed to full market cost. Though in some areas we will still look at leasehold. It's about changing the attitude of culture. That's particularly around the middle managers in Cornwall Council. There's a phrase somebody used called the permafrost of middle management. We've certainly come across that. We are melting it, but it still exists in places. And for us now, devolution is the only game in town. What I'll do now is just describe some of the examples. The first one there is probably one of the very early ones. It's Carnbray Monument. For any of those who know Cornwall, know the Camborne Pool, Redruth area, it's the big monument on the top of the hill that you can see. That was transferred to the Parish Council about 2 years ago. They've also taken over the management of the whole area there. The second case study is in Penryn, where the Town Council had a small office. They've actually now got one of Cornwall Council's one-stop shops in their offices, and that's a very effective way of delivering that local service, but also Cornwall Council having a presence in that town. One of the bigger ones is Tintagel up on the north coast, famous for supposedly King Arthur's castle and all those other things, so as a huge local tourism industry. That tourist centre there was built about 10 years ago. That was transferred to the local parish council with the car park 2 or 3 years ago, but then there was a huge fear then by giving away the freehold that the site would be developed and all that sort of thing. The reality of it, that will always be a visitor centre in a car park in that community. It will never be developed, so I think it's a false risk. Another one there, Bude Sea Pool. This is a photograph, unfortunately, taken before the storms of last winter. It's not quite in the same condition now as it was when that photograph was taken. But that's sort of an old lido that's there on the north coast of Cornwall. It's salt water in there, but there's a community group taking over the running of that. The Friends of Bude Sea Pool run that now, working with the Town Council. And so that's preserved for the future. The biggest one we've done to date is the municipal buildings in Falmouth. Again, 2 years ago, the freehold of that wouldn't have been considered for transfer, but that was transferred on the 1st of April this year. The Town Council now got their offices in there. They've leased some back to us to put a library in. There's an art gallery there. There's probably going to put a cafe in there as well. So there's a source of income there. So that building, we call it an asset. It's actually a maintenance liability. You know, it's a listed building. DDA compliance is poor and those sort of things. So actually, a lot of money needs to be spent on that building to bring it up to scratch. The Town Council have now got that. They've got a source of revenue there in the building to do that. So that's moving forward apace. There's St Day Clock. St Day is one of those areas right in the heart of the old sort of mining villages that were, 200 years ago, probably the richest square mile in the world. That town clock was built then. Again, it's a maintenance liability. That's been transferred to the parish council. But as part of that transfer, we've put some money in. They've put some money in. It's attracted a Heritage Lottery fund to get it brought up to standard. So again, that's a case of being clever with the money and drawing in external funding. Similar to what Simone was saying earlier on, if you're clever with your money, there are sources of funding out there that you can use. Another one there is Jubilee Pool down in Penzance. Again, that's a photograph taken before the ravages of last winter. That's now Cornwall Council working with the Town Council and also working with a group called the Friends of Jubilee Pool. That's just attracted a Coastal Communities Fund of £2 million to revamp that, put right the damages of last winter, and to reopen that next year. The really interesting thing there is the Friends of Jubilee Pool have raised over £60,000 in less than 3 months to support that project. That's through local events. They haven't yet gone to crowdfunding, but they think about going to crowdfunding, and they think that'll bring potentially another £100,000 into that. And that's the sort of level of things that we're looking at. Then probably this is one of the smaller ones, but to me one of the best examples. This is Port Wrinkle up on the southeast coast of Cornwall, between sort of Looe and Plymouth. Very small village. There's the public toilets there. There is the photograph on the right is claimed to be a Cornwall Council flower bed. But if you can find a flower in there that's been planted, you're a better person to me. I mean, that's just rough scrubland to me. A very good growth of docks. And there's a very small harbour there. Again, a photograph taken last year when there was a harbour there. Now the Town Council have taken that on, or the Parish Council have taken that on. They got the small amount of income from the car park, then pays for the maintenance of the flower beds, the toilets, and they now administer the harbour there. So there was licence agreements for the boats there, £10 a year agreement, but we were administering that from somewhere 50 miles away. Not a very clever way of administering something like that. So they do that now locally. So that's really some case studies of what's happened in reality. I just want to go through now some of the challenges that we found in the last 2 or 3 years. The first one is internal to Cornwall Council. That's the challenges between the services and the budgets they've got. Each service will have a challenging budget target. So a car park is trying to increase their income. the environment service are trying to cut their costs. So when we come up with a devolution package, we've got to do a lot of work behind the scenes to get the budgets right, so that the parent budgets for the services are actually a balance. They go with the devolution package rather than trying to stop it. Again, it takes a lot of time to do these negotiations. Even the simple one at Port Wrinkle there that I spoke about, it was probably 3 or 4 months to get that to fruition. And what you need there is you need somebody, the clerk needs to be on board. In that case, the chair of the parish council was very heavily involved. Before they took it on, they held 2 public meetings with the people to say, are you happy that we take this on? Because it might have an impact on the precept moving forward. It had nil impact on the precept as it was. They say in the future, if the car park needs resurfacing or the toilets need refurbishing, we may need to increase the precept. But they had 2 public meetings before they would sign the agreement. So they've signed the agreement now, and that's sitting back with them. So that's important. Again, in some examples, we've got a small capital pot, so we can do some work to bring an asset up to a suitable level before it's handed over. Particularly around some of the public conveniences we've handed over, we've had to spend quite a lot of money just to bring them up to what I call an adequate level of standard, let alone a good level of standard. And again, when it comes back to challenging the cabinet members and the heads of service, is how you get that value between the capital receipts, the revenue costs, but also what it's doing to that local community. And one thing I'm, wearing the hat I do, is about how you get the community more involved, volunteering opportunities, those sort of things, is something that's very, very hard to put a financial value on, but they are hugely significant. And if people are looking after their local assets, they'll have much more pride in it. And so therefore, the actual costs in the long run come down. And again, all of the challenges here, we are trying to work with the reducing tax base and reducing funding, which makes life difficult. What's the other challenges been for Cornwall Council? A lot of our service managers don't understand how town and parish councils work. They don't realise they work on the same financial budget cycle that Cornwall Council does. That at this moment in time, you'll be setting your precepts for next year. We're asking you to set your precept before we set our council tax, to see what your precept is before we set our council tax. But we want you to take over the services. It just doesn't make sense. So we've done a lot of work with middle managers to sort of say, if you want the local parishes to be more involved, you've got to be talking to them during the spring and the summer. So when they set their precept in the autumn, they know what the sort of potential costs are. Again, it's how town and parishes work with the voluntary community sector. Some of the examples that I've given you there, it's a community group that have taken on the asset, not the town and parish council. Where the win-win is in the Penzance example, where it's a community group working with the town council together in harmony and not trying to sort of see each other as a rival. And that can be a real challenge for us. But I think that has changed. Certainly when we went to Unitary in 2009, it was real. It was a real rivalry between the two sectors. I think now people realise we're in this together, so they're working together on lots of these things. I'm not sure what the rules are in Wales. Certainly in England, there's a risk that the larger town and parishes will have their precepts capped, but we won't know about that until next Easter when they've set the precept in February, which again is a real problem because you could then have to go to local referendum if it's above 2%. So that's putting a lot of people very, very afraid of raising their precepts. What we have found though, many of the large town councils have already done it already. The last 2 years, they've been increasing their precept by 20 or 30%. Newquay, which is one of the biggest precepting councils in Cornwall, raised theirs by 88% last year. But they did that after a huge round of public meetings and getting a public mandate. And that really came around because they knew a lot of the toilets in the town were being closed and a lot of the open spaces would have reduced maintenance. But as Newquay's a huge tourist resort, the town council saw it was important. They raised it by 88% and they got the support. They haven't had any challenges at all on that. Again, I think I've said that already, the challenge on the budget cycle and timings there. And again, Cornwall Council is going through reorganisations year on year, as are all the other people who work, particularly health. Health community has changed massively in the last 3 years. It's still changing, and even the police, which you think are relatively stable, they're going through changes as well. And you've got the added bonus now of the police commissioner. Quite what they do, I don't know, but I'll let you decide on that one. I'm not a politician. Well, I am really, so I'm a parish councillor as well, but I don't like to mention that. Something we have in England as well is the Localism Act and the community rights to bid. I don't know if you have that in Wales, but certainly in England, a community group can list an asset as an asset of community importance. Then if it ever comes on the market, whoever owns it, they have got a 6-month window of opportunity to actually put a bid in for it. At the moment, Cornwall is the first area in England to go over 100. We went over 100 nominations about 2 weeks ago. We've listed 82. As yet, none of those have come up for sale, or the community haven't bought them. But it's Cornwall Council assets, but where to me the real value is, it's the pubs, the post offices and the shops. That's where I think the real opportunity is. If it's the last pub in the town or the last shop or the last post office, I think there's a lot of solutions there where the community take over running the shops or the pubs or whatever. We haven't got it yet, but there are some good examples around. We've also had a lighthouse listed, but I'm not sure what else you're going to do with a lighthouse other than treat it as a lighthouse. Okay, a little bit now around the community empowerment. It's not devolution, but it is devolution. And when Cornwall went to unitary in 2009, we had 6 district councils. The real fear was then that Cornwall Council would be out of touch with the local communities. This is where I sort of started work on the agenda, and we eventually developed what we call 19 community network areas, and they cover Cornwall. They look similar in sort of size. They actually vary hugely. The biggest, by a long way, is the Camborne, Poole, Redruth, on the southwest there. The population of that network is 55,000 people, with 2 big town councils and small parishes. The smallest is up in the east, is Camelford. It's geographically one of the biggest, but it's only got 10,000 people in it. But these are communities of identity. They're where people come together. If you said, where do you come from in Cornwall, you say Cornwall, then you say where, and they will probably say Bude or Camelford or that. So it's that level of identity that we've worked on. And therefore we try to bring Cornwall Council members and the Town and Parish Councils together in those areas, probably at least once every 2 months, just to talk about the issues that are live in that areas and agree what some of the local priorities are. They are called community network panels. They are almost formal, but they don't actually have any formal decision-making powers or budgets. Though there is talk at the moment they may well have some small budgets to manage in the future, but I think with that it's a risk of getting a huge level of bureaucracy that possibly won't add anything to the equation. So that's a debate we're having now in Cornwall. I head the team that supports that, so I have community network managers, community regeneration officers, which is very similar in the role to what Simone was talking about earlier on, and other people there. There's about 25 people in that team, more or less. There's about 30 people with some work part-time, so about 25 FTEs covering all of Cornwall. And we are now forming a dedicated devolution team to lead forward on some of those devolution examples that I gave you. So the localism team, the core team, they're really there to facilitate. It's that key word, facilitate. They're not there to do, they're there to bring people together, to support people. Really, they did a lot of work over the last 5 years, helping bring money into Cornwall. I think last year we brought in just under £3 million of funding into community projects. Excuse me, just a drink. They're also there to start the sort of devolution debate, but when it comes down to the detailed negotiations, it will come back to the devolution team to sort of take that forward. And again, the real aims are just to influence decision-making rather than actually have absolute control at that local level, and to sort of look and bring together the public service at that local level as well. If we actually now literally, I think by the time I go back on Monday, the devolution team could be in place. It's moving that fast. This is something that's come about as part of the budget process we started 3 weeks ago. As part of that, we're going to put a dedicated devolution team in place. So they will have people that are expert negotiators, a bit like Kofi Annan and those sort of people that used to go into war zones and try to get harmony. But there'll be people from the property service, the environment service, highway services. There'll be others from like libraries and leisure, which may or may not be involved in some areas, but then there'll be a support team. They'll have finance, HR, legal, because if we do look to transfer these services, in many cases something called 2 people apply, where the person actually doing the work now may move to the new organisation. So we need to manage all that. And we've also got a very robust programme management arrangement sitting around that all, because as you will appreciate, some of these get a little bit controversial, so the corporate director or the chief exec occasionally has to make some decisions about how we take one forward. The other risk we've got is what we call mind the gap. The big town councils, the others are moving forward at a pace. My fear is that some of those smaller rural parish councils, the parish meetings are going to be left behind, and you're going to get a postcode lottery of service to devolution. So how we can manage that. We've also got, you'll have competing agendas at the local level and those sort of things, so it's how we try and get some agreement and some stuff around there. And again, it's how we just manage that expectation. Some communities seem to have got a higher level of social capital than others, and it's how we just harness those ones that haven't got that and make sure they're not left behind. To support the process, this is how we work with CALC, which is the Cornwall Association of Local Councils, the similar body to One Voice Wales. We've also got an overarching group of voluntary community sector infrastructure partners. So we now got a joint training programme because Cornwall can access some European funding that the VCS can access. They get money to provide training to Town and Parish Council clerks to increase their skills. So it's a win-win-win situation there. We're using European funding to finance the voluntary sector to train Town and Parish Council people, that's clerks and members. So that's a really good situation. We're also doing work in many areas to set up community interest companies or other forms of social enterprise, because if you look into some of the legislation, some of the finance, sometimes a community interest company can get discretionary rate relief and these sort of things that Town and Parish Councils can't get. And there's ways there of reducing costs if you're clever. And also, whatever you do, there's an issue around VAT, and I'm not going to talk to you about VAT, but just be careful, because VAT can come and bite you on the bum if you aren't careful in some of these cases. We are developing a peer support network, so these are some of the more able town councils and some of the more able parish councils working across all to offer support to town and parish councils that want to change the way they do things. We're also encouraging local clusters, and I think that's something that was alluded to earlier on, that some of these smaller parishes, whether they merge formally or they actually just work together, is something we're looking at moving forward. It's also around sharing best practice, that's locally and county-wide and internationally now as well. We are working now to develop some model specifications, so where a town and parish council is going to take on the management of open space or something, rather than them having to write 213 different contracts, we will say, here's some model contracts you may want to use. You're free to use your own, but you can use this one that's already written for you. Again, we're supporting external funding bids, and like as I alluded to with St Day Clock, by using a little bit of money from us, a little bit of money from the parish council, we attracted a lot of lottery funding. The same with Penzance. If you're clever with your money, you can get a lot of external funding brought in. The other one is around transitional support mechanisms. Some of the town councils are taking on services that they're just not geared up to at the moment. So we'll say, we'll hold your hand for 2 or 3 years, but after 2 or 3 years, you've got to take this on yourself. We can't be there forevermore, but we will work with you in that transition period. So what's the future? Well, if somebody could tell me, I'll be very grateful, because like you are, we're all facing many challenges. There is definitely a changing role of town and parish councils. I think there's a changing role for me of the clerk. I don't know how many people here today are clerks or any councillors, but certainly I think the day of the parish clerk minuting the meeting and putting the notes on the parish notice board and that is gone. To me, they are now an employee managing contracts, managing services. So I think they need to be duly recompensed for that as well. And I think that's a challenge for many parishes. They're reluctant to raise the precept to pay the clerk, but I think in many cases it's the only way they're going to move forward. Some parish councils now are looking at developing 4-year business plans and that sort of thing, so they get elected and say, this is what we're going to try to do over the next 4 years. Some are sort of setting up arm's length trading companies now that can deliver services using the power of competence and other things. Again, mergers. Mike alluded to the One Ilfracombe model earlier on. If anybody hasn't seen the One Ilfracombe model, I really urge you to have a look at the way the One Ilfracombe model has been set up. It's a community-based sort of community budget scheme where they've set up an arm's length, well, it's a company limited by guarantee that works alongside the town council. And again, it works very, very well. There doesn't seem to be any rivalry between the two. The other ones, which I alluded to earlier on, the future, some of our town councils are now looking at the health and social care aspects, and they're coming to us saying we think we can have a role in that. Certainly something we haven't considered in the past, but something we will look at. There is that risk of capping, which we've said, I'm not sure if the same applies in Wales. It's certainly very live to us in Cornwall at the moment. And then the other challenge which we're finding is actually knowing the true costs of providing a service, because many of the services that were provided by some of the districts, they had what I call a bucket code. So all of the toilets, all the grass stuff went into that one code. So when you actually try and break it down by per parish or town, it's virtually impossible. We're now having to re-engineer some of those figures now. So again, that's a real challenge. So, in conclusion, what would I say? It's for the Unitary Council is dealing with some of those competing internal priorities, but then actually working with the partners of the community to say what are your local priorities. It's this long-term v short-term budget pressures, but we've got to be aware of what's the best for that community in the long term. The devolution of services does take time, takes willingness, it takes, to me, consistency of people doing the negotiation as well. If people are changing all the time, it can easily fall over because it needs trust and confidence, and that does take time to develop. And we've got to recognise, I think when we started doing this, we're trying to do the same solution 213 times across Cornwall. If there are 213 to me different solutions, and I think in some areas there's different solutions for different parts of a town or a village, so there's probably more than 213 solutions. So that is a challenge. So that means in Wales there's over 700 solutions, so that will be a real challenge. Good luck. The final thing, to me though, the sky's the limit. If a town council comes to us or a parish council with an idea, I think 2 years ago we would have said no. Now we will say, yeah, let's talk about it, because that's the only way we're going to move forward. We're going to be able to deal with some of the challenges Cornwall faces and some of our local communities face. And that, for those of you who don't know, that's the red arrows flying over Falmouth during Falmouth Regatta this year. So thank you very much.